This is a CBS 12 News special presentation. Hate Rising, Losing the Next Generation. Sponsored by the Morse Life Holocaust Learning Experience and Jewish Federation's Palm Beach Center to Combat Antisemitism and Hatred.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Magnoli.
And I'm Jim Grimes. Right now, the state of Israel and Jewish communities across the U.S. are facing a surge in threats, harassment, and intimidation. We're witnessing a rise in violence and hate speech, and it's surfacing in places where it's least expected.
So, Jim, this special report is for young people to understand what's happening and why. Not so much a history lesson as it is about current events in our world. Israel and Iran are on the brink of war. Israel is fighting for its very existence, the right to live. But there is growing anti-Israeli sentiment on American college campuses, and innocent men and women are being attacked and killed on American soil. Jim, you know that America and Israel are allies. We're close friends. That's why we have the flag of the United States and Israel in the monitor right now.
Yeah, over the next half hour, you're going to hear many voices. Long after our broadcast ends, we hope that this moves you to recognize hate when you see it and have the courage to stand up against it. We begin with a look at what's at stake. It's been a year marked by violence and hate. In April, authorities in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania arrest a man accused of firebombing the home of Governor Josh Shapiro. The governor and his family were fast asleep inside but managed to escape with their lives.
It has to stop. We have to be better than this.
Investigators later learned the motive for targeting Shapiro. The suspect was strongly opposed to Israel and what he viewed as injustices against Palestinians.
I've been shaking. I've been so mad for the last 2 hours.
Just 1 month later in Philadelphia, Dave Portnoy, entrepreneur, social media personality, and founder of Barstool Sports, sounds off. A video showing several patrons holding a vulgar anti-Semitic sign inside Portnoy's Philadelphia bar quickly goes viral. It reignites a wave of anti-Semitic posts on social media. Less than 2 weeks later, the spotlight urgently shifts to the nation's capital.
We believe the shooting was committed by a single suspect who is now in custody.
The gunman tells investigators he carried out the attack for Gaza. He's accused of fatally shooting a young Jewish couple outside a Jewish museum. The victims worked at the Israeli embassy. The brazen act of violence renews widespread fears over rising anti-Semitism.
There's a male with a blowtorch setting people on fire.
Still reeling from the murders in Washington, another disturbing incident unfolds, this time in Boulder, Colorado. A man hurls Molotov cocktails into a peaceful gathering of pro-Israeli demonstrators on June 1st. Several people are injured, including an 88-year-old Holocaust survivor. Witnesses say the attacker shouted "Free Palestine" during the assault.
We have a huge problem with anti-Semitism running wild in this country right now.
Sadly, these incidents aren't isolated. They're part of a deeply troubling rise in anti-Semitism, one that's not only spreading across communities, but also shaping the minds of our young people in some dangerous ways.
Jim, you covered a lot in that piece. A lot of young people don't get their news from traditional outlets. They're going to social media, but that is not always the most reliable source of information.
Yeah, and that said, some influencers are using their platforms to shine a light on the daily struggles faced by the Jewish community. One of them is Montana Tucker, a dancer, singer, and passionate activist. In fact, you may have seen her in the headlines over the dress she wore at the Grammy Awards.
I got invited to go to the Grammys, and as an artist, that's the biggest deal. To be invited to walk the carpet and to, attend the Grammys is a huge deal. And the previous award shows, we tried to get people to wear this yellow pin, and no one would wear it. We had this idea to just put this, huge yellow ribbon on the dress and to make the whole dress solely about the ribbon. And so everything else is nude color, so that the ribbon was really the focus of it. And the message was bring them home. That's it. And when I got there, I took my jacket off, did the carpet, and everyone was, kind of freaking out about it. They said that my dress was too political and that they didn't do politics at the Grammys. So that was a pretty crazy moment for me. And I walked back out there, and 2 minutes later, Harvey Mason Jr., who's actually the head of the entire Recording Academy, saw my dress and he said, "Thank you so much for wearing that. Can we take a photo? I love your dress." So that was a big moment. And then usually I post behind the scenes photos or videos of me getting ready. And that day, because it was such a big thing, I didn't post anything. And I finally sat down in my seat. And when I opened my phone, my phone just kind of was blowing up. The photos are posted everywhere already.
You yourself have, however, lost followers, even some endorsements as well, because of your stance. Does that bother you?
In the first few weeks, I lost hundreds of thousands of followers. And at first it was shocking because obviously, my whole life and how I was making my money was brand deals on TikTok and on social media, and it was based off of my following. And then I just couldn't believe that that many people had that much hate inside of them, that they felt they had to unfollow me and then send me death messages and death threats. And so I wasn't really like upset. I was just more shocked because I know for a fact that the messaging in all my content is calling for unity and peace for everyone, and all groups of people. And so that was really just, more shocking and upsetting to me. Unfortunately, being anti-Semitic, being hateful towards anyone is popular right now. It just is. And especially with our younger generation, that is popular. And we live in this day and age, especially with our younger generation. I built my platforms not from my activism, not from speaking about Israel or speaking about, combating anti-Semitism. I built my platforms from dance, from singing, from acting, and from collaborating with people of all walks of life. If you look at my page, you'll see I've done videos with people of all ages, all races, all ethnicities, all sexual orientations. It's always been important for me to unite people.
And when we come back, we'll talk with another social media influencer. More candid questions and answers. This is Hate Rising, Losing the Next Generation.
Welcome back. We'd now like to introduce you to another social media personality who is using her platform in support of Israel.
So, Jim, her name is Tanya Zuckerbrat, and she used to be primarily a health and wellness guru. But after the attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023, she decided she didn't want to use those social media accounts to talk about nutrition anymore. She wanted to talk about the Jewish homeland. Can we talk about the music festival specifically? That was an attack on young people. Killed, maimed, kidnapped. Do you think that young people in America understand what happened at that event?
If they don't, I'm happy to put some color to it because as a parent of 5 children, 5 kids in college who often go to festivals or to concerts, I don't think that we in the United States live with the fear that if our kids go to a concert that they're not going to come back, that either they're going to be, murdered or kidnapped and taken to another country and held hostage for years on end. And that is basically how Israelis live, that they constantly are living under the threat of death, that they are surrounded by neighbors who want them dead. And these were young kids, young adults who went to a concert to celebrate life. And the irony is that many of the attendees are really freedom-loving people. A lot of the people taken from the kibbutz live near Gaza because they are so humanitarian in their philosophies. And to see that so many of these attendees are people that love all people and they were killed just because of their religion is the most disheartening thing in the world, because here we are thinking that the days of the Holocaust are so far behind us, that never again meant never again. And yet we are seeing anti-Semitism rear its ugly head. And I think it's because the truth is it never went away. It just morphed.
I'd like to talk about some of the domestic things that happened too in the past year that speak to this. Those young Jewish diplomats that were killed in Washington, D.C., outside of the museum. The flamethrower attack in Boulder, Colorado. These are not things that are happening in foreign countries. These are happening in the United States of America, in our backyard.
Correct. And you just gave perfect examples of how this anti-Zionist movement is nothing more than a Jew-hating movement. How is it that you can hold responsible people who are at a civil protest demanding the return of hostages and somehow suggest that they don't have the right to live, and you're throwing, firebombs at them? One of them was a Holocaust survivor. Can you imagine that person's experience, that they survived the Holocaust? And who would think, fast forward to 2025, that in the United States, where we have Title VI, where all people should be treated equally, that someone should fear walking out and that their life would be at risk simply because they're Jewish or they believe that the Jewish state has the right to exist.
All right, but what about for the viewer, the young viewer that's not Jewish, a Christian, somebody of another faith or maybe no faith? I would like you to speak to that and how someone in their shoes could speak out to this, even if it doesn't touch their life directly.
It is often said that it starts with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews. And the attack on what we are seeing right now is not just about Jews, but it's against democracy. And I think that at the end of the day, this is the fight of good versus evil. And I just would ask that you really take the time to educate yourself, to ask questions, and to think about that word empathy and compassion. You know, what if you went to a concert with your friends and then 1,200 of you were murdered, or that you were held hostage? Even if you don't necessarily agree with the government of Israel, and no government is perfect, these are still innocent civilians whose many lives were lost or utterly destroyed, and many still have not been returned home. So I think that while all conflicts can be, I think, hard to understand, right, at such a young age, at the very least, try to look at it through a lens of compassion for both sides. Because certainly as a Jew, I don't want to see any innocent people harmed, not in Gaza and certainly not in Israel. And I think that would serve us as a nation to look at this through that lens, that we all matter.
Turning the page now from influencers to a local organization leading in the charge against anti-Semitism. The Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County has emerged as a powerful force in the fight against hate. We got a chance to speak with their executive director, Josephine Gon, to understand why, despite tireless efforts, anti-Semitism persists. Do you find that most people are somewhat apathetic when it comes to understanding and showing empathy toward the plight of Jewish people across the globe?
I think most people have no idea. I have no idea. I think they are, when they find out what's actually going on, they're hopefully appalled. But it's not part of most people's consciousness.
Does it alarm you that we're seeing this younger generation growing up and finding them to be probably more anti-Semitic than the generations before?
Whether one generation is worse than the other, I don't know. Clearly the hate is the same. Clearly the need is the same. To what extent it will manifest itself, we don't know.
It feels like the face-to-face communication that used to be the norm is no longer the case. Does that hurt this younger generation when it comes to showing empathy and connecting with messages like the one we're talking about?
There's no question that it has reduced empathy. It creates a social barrier where you can say things that you wouldn't say to a person just sitting behind a screen. You know, and some really ugly things are said. And if you can challenge that, sometimes they back off because it's bravado. I think social media can be beneficial if you can convey a positive message. But there's so much manipulation between AI and between countries who do not have our interests at heart behind some of the social media that is out there. I think kids don't know what's true and what isn't anymore.
What are the things that we're not doing right now that could help to alleviate some of the anti-Semitism we're seeing across the globe?
It has to be everybody's responsibility to say there's something profoundly wrong here. When Jews are being targeted, murdered, burnt, and somehow, oh, you know, let's move on with our day. It simply has to be an all-of-society response.
This moment in time, there feels like a sense of urgency. If we lose this generation, what happens with the next one and the next one? Are we at a crossroads?
I think we're living history right now. We're at an inflection point, in my view. We've got to help Americans understand that this is not a Jewish problem. That when people come for the Jews, we're first, but we're not last. And they're going to come for other minorities and other groups. And that essentially our liberal democracy is at stake here.
When we come back, my interview with famous attorney Alan Dershowitz. He's controversial. He's known for defending some of the most high-profile suspects in American true crime and pop culture. Well, he is also a staunch defender of Israel. Don't go away.
Welcome back. You've probably heard the terms Zionism and Zionists. Those refer to the belief that the Jewish people deserve their own country.
So Judaism is a religion, and there are people of the Jewish faith all over the world, but Zionists believe that Israel is their rightful home, a land to call their own. In 1948, the State of Israel was formally established and recognized by then U.S. President Harry Truman as a nation.
Mike, the word Zionist was brought up several times in your interview with famed lawyer and professor Alan Dershowitz.
That's right, it was, because he has written several books about Israel. And our younger audience might recognize his name if they've seen any of the O.J. Simpson documentaries and dramas that have been popular in the past few years. He was part of the Dream Team who defended O.J., and Dershowitz is arguably one of the most brilliant legal minds in recent history. Here's why a lawyer and a team of lawyers might be a part of Israel's future. Several countries are calling on Israeli leaders to be charged with war crimes. When Israel has attacked its enemies, like what's happening now, some in the international community have condemned those actions, and the ICC, that's the International Criminal Court based in The Hague in the Netherlands, they have issued warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and others in Israel's government and military. So the ICC and the US and some of our allies are at odds over this. If this ever went to trial, Alan Dershowitz says he would represent Israel. I want to talk about anti-Semitism and how we should be engaging young people so that they're aware of what's going on, so they know how to recognize it, so they know how to speak out against it. How do you think that conversation starts?
It's very difficult because it's become a thing now with lots of young people to focus on Israel, Zionism, Jews, you name it. Also, to some extent, Christianity. And when kids young people in college begin to follow other people, it's very hard to get them to think about it. And people aren't thinking about it. They don't know the history that anti-Semitism goes back, 3,000 years. It's the oldest continuing prejudice. They don't understand anything about Israel. They don't know that the Palestinians were offered a state 1937, 1948, 1967, 2000, 2001, 2005, 2007. Every time they said no, they didn't want a Palestinian state. They just didn't want there to be a Jewish state. They just don't know the history, and it's irrational. And I have friends whose children are marching with Hamas. They're so appalled. But this is the thing among college students today. Look at what happened the other day at Columbia when they booed the president and started screaming and yelling. And it's not about Palestinian rights. It's about being anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. It's all anti, it's not pro.
Professor, they might see this segment and see you, and they might say, who is this guy? Never heard of him, never seen him. So how do you explain your role as you see it in speaking out against this and your involvement in being a staunch defender of Israel?
Well, I've been a defender of Israel since I was born. In 1948, when Israel was established, I was 10 years old. So I grew up assuming that following the Holocaust, surely there was a right to have one Jewish state. There are dozens and dozens of Muslim states and Christian states and non-secular states. Why not one Jewish state? It never occurred to me that we'd have to have this kind of battle, but I've always defended the underdog.
What of this? You're surrounded by enemies. You are surrounded by countries and people that do not want you to exist.
Yeah, and you have to fight back. And, Jews are not going to roll over again the way they had to between 1940 and 1945. They're going to fight back. And when they say never again, they mean it. And they developed nuclear weapons not to use them, but to make sure that their enemies didn't develop nuclear weapons. And now they're facing the threat that Iran might develop nuclear weapons. And the former head of Iran, the liberal head of Iran, said, if we develop nuclear weapons and bomb Tel Aviv, that's the end of Israel, because Israel's a one-bomb state. Drop one bomb, it's the end of Israel. He then said, but Israel would retaliate, drop bombs on Tehran and can kill 10 million Muslims, And then he said the trade-off would be worth it because it would mean the end of Israel and Islam would survive. You can't allow a country with a leader like that to have access to nuclear weapons. So Israel has to engage in preventive war.
Among the organizations making a real difference in our community is Morse Life. Recognizing the power of education, they've created specially produced lesson plans to help teachers to bring the history of the Holocaust into the classroom. These multimedia resources not only educate, they open the door to meaningful conversations about the dangers of hate and the importance of standing up to anti-Semitism.
And Jim, when you interviewed Jenny Frumer from Morris Life, you asked her a question that I think was so poignant, and it's really the reason behind this special. You think about it, those students see one lesson from that Holocaust program, and not only does it get the conversation started, but they see it as a call to action.
Have we lost this generation?
I think we may have lost more than just this generation. I feel at times that we've lost 2 or 3 generations.
Does this lesson in some way allow a teacher to open it up to the current events that we see unfolding?
Of course they do, because these lessons focus on building better people and talking about how bias and prejudice can oftentimes lead to hate and violence. And so, yes, they're able to talk with students about current events. I think that it actually gives them something as a foundation from which to talk about current events. When there are murders on the street of our cities, and when people are victimized. So I think that it does open up a pathway to provide the foundation from which they can talk more confidently about what's happening in the world today.
Is that the most important lesson, is to speak up?
Speaking up is absolutely critical, but as survivors tell students, even if you are a lone voice, you must speak up, but you must do it in a safe way. So speaking up doesn't mean putting oneself in danger. Speaking up means doing it strategically, thinking about it. Who do you go to talk for help? But it starts with not just indifference about what's happening around you. So they're learning that indifference is complicity, that speaking up is really important, but it doesn't mean you have to speak up right then, right there in that moment.
Now, to dovetail off of her point for our young audience, she's saying you can go to the principal's office at the end of the school day if you're seeing or hearing hate speech in the cafeteria, and you have to contact law enforcement if you've heard something about a threat. Jim, speaking up doesn't always mean you're making a big show, but if you say nothing and you do nothing, you are allowing hate to slide.
Good reminder that it's up to all of us to make a difference. We'd like to thank you for watching this edition of Hate Rising.
This has been a CBS 12 News special presentation. Hate Rising, Losing the Next Generation. Sponsored by the Morse Life Holocaust Learning Experience and Jewish Federation's Palm Beach Center to Combat Antisemitism and Hatred.